Courage is a very compelling, very human idea. It's also a critical component of leadership, but it can sometimes feel a bit slippery to grasp. There is no simple courage button that we can turn on and off. So what exactly is courage? Where and how does it happen? And how do we become more courageous? To explore this in more depth, I was joined by Dave Hardegger, Head of Solutions and Practice for Impact Asia. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Thanks for having me, Dan. I'm doing pretty well. It's a beautiful sunny morning here in New Zealand. So it's a bit warm, but otherwise all good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. And I'm jealous to death of you being in New Zealand, because that was one of my favourite countries I travelled to back in my youth. It feels like a long time ago now. I suppose it was. Anyway, I'm going off topic already. Let's find out a bit more about you first. So
Sure.
we will kind of ask this question right at the beginning of all of our episodes, and to give our audience a bit of a better opportunity to get to know you. So why don't you tell us about yourself in 60 seconds?
60 seconds or less. So good morning. I'm Dave Hardegger. I'm currently the Head of Solutions and Practice for Impact Asia, so across our region, and I'm also the General Manager for our business here in New Zealand, Aotearoa. But more importantly, I'm a very committed and loving husband, father, son, and brother. Pretty active, love getting into the outdoors. Been with Impact for 16 years and feel very blessed and privileged to get to do what I do.
Well, Impact are very lucky to have you, as are all of your family members that you just described. So thank you ever so much for joining us, and appreciate you taking some time. And of course, finding time zones that work for us all is tricky, but not impossible. So let's get into the sort of the main topic of today's episode. And we're talking all things courage and what it kind of means. So why don't you give us the bit of a high level overview of what we mean when we're talking about courage in this context?
So the context being leadership. I think the first thing, Dan, is I think courage is really subjective. So what do I mean by that? I mean, something that might take me courage to do might feel completely normal to you, right? It might be part of your everyday. It might be just a normal act for you. Even extreme things like, let's say, take a firefighter running into a house fire. Like if you see that, I don't know about you, I'm sitting there going, wow, that's courageous. The firefighter might be going, nah, just another day at the office. That was a small one, looks completely safe, right? I think there's lots of really great sayings about courage, and I think you find ones that resonate you, whether it's, courage is not the absence of fear, but feeling the fear and doing it anyway. But for me, courage is when we notice something needs doing and it feels difficult or challenging to us, but we somehow summon up the presence to do that thing with grace, with compassion, with humility, right? So there's something there that needs to be done, and we might not want to do it, but it needs to be done, and somebody needs to do it, and we take it upon ourselves to do that. But we do it in a way that's in service of others, right? So I could do something. I could challenge a senior leader in our business on their point of view or their opinion. But if I'm doing it from a place of serving me, then maybe it's ego. Maybe it's politics. But if I'm doing it in a place of serving you or serving other people, then I feel like that's courage. Sorry, that was a super long answer. But
I think it does help. And I think maybe there's some real life examples that you can sort of conjure up that might bring what you're saying, because when when I was sort of looking at the notes for this episode, I was thinking exactly what you said before about when we hear the word courage, we do sort of go towards the heroes, the people that do go into burning buildings. And I really like what you said, that to the firefighter that is, like you say, it's their day to day. They might they don't probably see it as courageous because it's what they're trained to do. It's what they, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So I really like what you said there. And then I think from a sort of an organizational context, there might be some systemic things that might be or seemingly not right, or something that you, as you pointed out, noticed, that you feel obliged to do something about, but maybe doesn't feel like your place to, or you might fear those repercussions of speaking up and that type of thing. So it does kind of bring it to life what you've been saying there. So maybe let's focus in on that kind of leadership toolkit element. So you mentioned noticing there. Now I know that, and we both know that is, it sort of fits into Impact's leadership model. So perhaps you can explain a bit more about the leadership model and where courage fits within it.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. So I presume you're going to put it there or there.
I might
So
have to now.
yeah,
So.
you might have to now.
If not,
So
we'll put a link to it.
yeah, and this is going to sound funny, but I actually love our leadership model. I think it's a really empowering, easy model for people to grasp and to take. I remember the first time I shared it with my wife, before she was going on a quite a challenging project for her. It was really moving for her, right? Because our leadership model takes this act of leadership, or the concept of leadership, and we take it away from a positional people aspect and we put it into an action, right? So the model is really simple. It's, as you know, it's notice, decide, act. And we have a point in between decide and act where we say summon the courage. But I actually think courage sits around the whole model. Because at the top of the model, we have notice what's going on. And we talk about being outwardly alert and inwardly aware. And that right there takes courage, right? How deep am I willing and able to go to understand and be aware of what's going on for me? So by that, I mean, what part do I play? Let's say I'm having a conversation with you, Dan, and you do something that triggers me. I have an emotional response, right, to what you're saying or doing. It's not your intention, but that's the impact it has on me. Now, that's my stuff, right? So what's going on and how courageous am I to look deep within me as a human being, as a leader, to understand what's causing that emotional response in me as a person in that moment. So it's not just about being inwardly aware in terms of, oh, I'm feeling a bit angry or a bit frustrated or a bit annoyed at Dan. It's like, what's causing that? Right. And that's courage, because we've got to really sit with ourselves and try to understand who we are and why are we responding in the way we do. And then courage carries on down, because we need to make a decision, notice, decide, right? And sometimes those decisions are actually, I'm not the right person to take an act right now. And that could take courage, because there's so much expectation on us from society to try to be that heroic leader, right? Which is the concept we have moved away from so strongly. But there's pressure there. And sometimes it takes courage to say, no, this isn't the right thing for me right now to do. Or it takes courage to go, oof, not sure I want to do this, but someone's got to, and step in. And then obviously the courage to take that action, so that we can help move something forward. And again, hopefully in service of the greater good and others.
So could it be sort of described as something being courageous as stepping outside of your comfort zone? Is that a sort of fair way to describe it?
Absolutely. When we're doing something that's challenging or uncomfortable for us, outside of our everyday range or norm, that we're noticing needs to happen and it has to be done. So yeah, it's something that, and so the more things we do, it's like our comfort zone, I guess, really. Like the more things we do that require courage, the more courageous we become. because it's a muscle, I guess, is one way of
Well,
looking at it. So,
let's get into that then. So, because that was going to be my next question anyway, which is, of course, one of the things that we want to get from these episodes is the opportunity for people to kind of learn a little bit. So what advice or what tips can you give that would sort of be a starting point or what advice can you give for people to develop their ability to act courageously?
I think the first one's in line with the first stage of our model, like notice, practice noticing what's going on around you and what's going on for you in those instances. I know for me personally, if something's going on and I feel like I don't have the courage to do it, a real warning sign for me is I get a burning sense in my throat.
Right.
Right. And that's so my body set, and we all have this, whether it's you get sweaty palms or butterflies in your stomach or a shudder, whatever. We'll have a body signal that says something's going on. I'm uncomfortable. I want to do something, but I don't know how to, or I don't have the courage. For me, it's I get a burning sense in the bottom of my throat, which says to me, Dave, something needs to be said or done. Step back and figure out what it is. And so that's in the moment stuff. I think post events, it's really good to journal, to process, to micro, and by journal I don't mean sit down for half an hour and write out your deepest thoughts, but it could be just like 2 or 3 minutes, Dan. Just what went on, how was I feeling, how did I respond, and that process really helps us make sense of what went on and how did we respond. And it's that sense making that allows us to understand what else we could do and how we could do that. So I think it's going back to noticing, taking the time to reflect, and sometimes looking for those little opportunities to make that courageous difference.
What might be a sort of a simple, like maybe a bit of an exercise, if you've got one, if you can think of one off the top of your head, to kind of, because some of those things won't come naturally to people that you've just described there. And I often think of myself when we go through these conversations, then you mentioned there about noticing. I mean, there's some, for some people, I think they're so up against it, what can be a really practical activity or exercise that somebody could do to kind of really hone in on those noticing skills and work on those sort of soft skills, as it were.
Finding some questions that you can ask yourself would be an immediate start, right? So we all have 1,000 thoughts going through our minds all the time, right? And we actually ask ourselves repeat questions unconsciously that we're not aware of. So trying to figure out a question that feels comfortable to you that you could ask. So it could be just like, oh, stop. What's really going on right now? Or it could be, how do I slow this down? Because as you said, we all have so much going on all the time. That pausing becomes unnatural. And so I think it's how do we find a question that serves us so that we can create the space so that we can choose our response as opposed to feeling like we're reacting all the time.
Yeah.
Like speed is not necessarily it's not always the best response. Sometimes slowing it down. So a question, what's actually going on for me right now? How do I slow this down? What does this actually mean? So like chunking up to try to understand, because our minds will, if we ask the right questions, our brains will give us the right answers.
Another thing I was thinking of while you were talking there is sort of deliberately taking slightly different roles in things like meetings. I was kind of thinking, like, if you're one to always speak in a meeting, no matter if it's a group team meeting, if you want to always speak, to maybe take a step back and sort of just sit and do in a bit of an observing role, and then vice versa, that if you're always a bit quiet in a meeting, perhaps like taking that courage to step up and put your hand up in a meeting can be quite a powerful thing, particularly if it's not something you normally do. And those things are fairly simple, right? But they can have their own level of courage, just in those small, slight changes to what we encounter day to day. And I just wondered, is there anything else that is something like that can be as embedded, as a slight change that can be embedded into day to day, that can help develop those sort of acts of courage, as it were?
I like your example more than mine. Maybe we should swap seats, Stan. Like, because yours was
Well, it
quite
was you that
practical and
inspired it, mate. It
pragmatic.
was you that inspired it. It's all good.
um, I, it's I keep going back to mind and concepts, right? Because it's training ourselves to find more opportunities, and you've
Yeah.
given us some really good practical opportunities. So it's noticing. Sorry, I keep coming back to this word. It is noticing the things that we don't want to do for whatever reason, and exploring what that reason is, and then pushing forward and challenging habits. So what you described before is like the preference to speak early in a meeting or late in a meeting or not at all. The habits based on our personalities or what we've learned before. Like I spoke up in a meeting when I was a junior and I got slammed by the boss. Never speaking up again. So how do we really catch the habits that we've created and challenge ourselves? Are they still serving me as well?
Yeah. I think that's a really good the I think that's a really good call out of kind of what we can do as individuals, because we have spoken about there. Like as a sort of another follow up question, because let's going back to the team element, or from a leader's perspective, what would you say is a bit of advice to help encourage or create the conditions for other people to act courageously? Because that's something we've not explored just yet.
Yeah, nice. So we often use the spotlight metaphor, right? So you think of leadership as being, imagine you're on a dance floor, a ballroom dance floor, which I'm sure you've spent a lot of time on, Dan.
Oh yeah,
So this will be
that's what I'm doing after this. In
easy,
fact, yeah.
yeah, this will be an easy one for you. But imagine you have the big spotlight beaming down onto the floor of a dance floor. Then leadership is our ability to know when and how to step in to that spotlight, and when and how to step out, and when and how to invite other people in. Right. And our role as leaders and as team members is to be conscious of that spotlight, and how do we dance? How do we allow the team and the team members to take their moments, dance in and out of that spotlight in accordance to their skills, strengths, development areas? I think is one aspect. If we want people to be courageous, then we need to really openly accept mistakes and really openly accept failure. I've got a quote on the wall behind me that says, do not fear failure, but be terrified of regret.
Yeah,
So it
that's a
is,
good
and
one.
that's not to say, hey, charge into everything or anything, but it's to say, if we want, and our role as leaders is to push and develop and stretch the edge of what we can do as individuals, is what my individuals and my team can do, and what we can do as an organization. So if we're afraid of failure, then that's a lack of courage right there, right? Like we need to be able to sit in mistakes with vulnerability and courage and go, okay, we tried. What do we learn? Where do we move on? And I think creating that kind of environment allows more courageous acts to bubble up to the surface, so to speak.
And I think what's interesting about that is that creating those environments is going to have a knock-on effect to other things like trust and psychological safety and that feeling included and all those kind of and all of these things that we talk about here are all key and to a sort of a human-centered leadership approach. I mean, that is, I've got it written behind me there. It's what we as an organization strive to help other businesses to kind of work towards. And then, of course, in theory, people who work in these types of organizations are more likely to stay and be more productive. And there's all these positives that have that knock-on effect. Dave, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of kind of of talking about courage.
Yep.
And so I'm kind of a bit gutted to say that we're kind of running out of time for today's episode, but I have no doubt that we will be back talking about this again.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I do have, and this might be bordering on the theme of courage, but I do have one final question for you, and it's a bit more of a personal question, and we ask it at the end of all of our episodes, and it's if you're looking back on your career, and you've probably heard this question a lot, you've probably even asked it to groups.
Yeah.
If you were to look back at your career and your life, and you had the opportunity to talk to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Now, it's funny, I suspected this one was coming, and I haven't thought about it or prepared for it, which is probably a good thing. What advice would I give myself? So I'll go back to the self-aware part, Dan, and have a bit of courage. Like deep inside, I'm a people pleaser, right? So, and part of that makes me a pretty good consultant, pretty good manager, pretty good leader. But there's part of that people pleasing element. If I gave advice to my younger self, I would say care a little bit less about what other people think and really, really hone into what's true and what's important for you and make those decisions, make faster decisions more cleanly in line with that, as opposed to worrying a little bit too much about what other people might think or say.
And would you say that you live by that advice now?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, more so than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's life, right? That's life, love, the universe, that's experience.
It is.
And for me, that's learning, investing a lot of time in learning who I am and who I am as a person and what's important to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great advice, and it is so true. And I've been very privileged to interview a lot of people and ask that question, and it's been fascinating to kind of find out a bit more about people's perspective on lives. And we've heard it all from giving like really great piece of advice to younger self and making sure they live it by it, but also the flip side of the coin is that actually I wouldn't say anything. I'm quite happy with where I've got to now, and any mistakes I've made, like we've talked about, any mistakes made along the way, it's all part of the journey. So it's just such a sort of a beautiful question and a way to finish off, and really gives an insight into people. So Dave, thank you ever so much for giving us your time. I'm going to let you get back to your day and almost your weekend. So thank you ever so much for joining me. And that just leaves me to say that if you'd like to find out any more about Impact or the work we do, or you'd like to find out any more about any of the other documents that are included in this document, I'm going to do this bit again at a later stage. You'll find all of the links that you need in the description of where you found today's episode. So thank you to Dave once more for joining me.
Thank you.
And until the next time, take care.